Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Here is what we're looking at. Abortion access is again before the U.S. Supreme Court for the first time since Roe v. Wade was overturned.
We will be patient.
It's been a week since the primary election, but the Democratic winner for Cook County State's attorney has yet to be declared. Our Spotlight Politics team has the latest.
A growing number of jurisdictions are applying the art of ranking to voting. So how does ranked
And Illinois lawmakers consider ranked choice voting. We explain how that works. Now to some of today's top stories. 6 people are still missing after a bridge collapsed in Baltimore. Officials say 8 construction workers were on the Francis Scott Key Bridge when a cargo ship crashed into it earlier this morning. 2 of them were rescued from the water. U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says the bridge collapse will have a major impact on supply chains. Chicago health officials have confirmed 14 cases of measles in the last week. 70% of all cases are in children younger than 4 years old. Those officials say the majority of the new cases are emanating from the city's largest migrant shelter, that troubled warehouse space in Pilsen where a young boy fell ill and later died of other causes this year. His death was caused by sepsis and other viruses, according to an autopsy. All residents in that shelter must now be vaccinated against the highly infectious disease. Still too close to call in the Cook County State's attorney's race. After the latest batch of counting, Eileen O'Neill Burke, her lead has shrunk to 1,600 votes. That's after Cook County tallied 800 mail-in ballots today. Neither O'Neill Burke or her opponent, Clayton Harris, have yet declared victory. And we'll get into all of this in Spotlight Politics in just a moment. Just when will we have a winner here? Some elected officials are sounding the alarm over a new study of lead in Chicago's drinking water. The study published in JAMA Pediatrics says that nearly 70% of Chicago children are exposed to lead in the city's drinking water. That translates to about 129,000 kids. Toxic lead exposure can lead to myriad health and development problems in children. Chicago Alderman Lamont Robinson says he wants the city to speed up the very costly replacement of the city's aging lead pipes.
There's no safe levels of lead, as Dr. Mona mentioned. And with knowing that, the move has to be, the urgency has to be now for us to be able to remove lead pipes.
The deadline is today for Little Village residents who want to apply for a portion of a $12 million class action lawsuit. Specifically, it's for residents who claim to have been caught up in the botched implosion of the Hilco smokestack on April 11th, 2020. That sent a giant plume of dust into the neighborhood. The Little Village Environmental Justice Organization says it expects approximately 130,000 people to submit claims for damages after many have talked about suffering from persistent respiratory illnesses since the implosion. And for details on how to apply, you can visit our website. And up next, a legal battle over the abortion pill. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The issue of abortion is once again before the U.S. Supreme Court. The case in question pits the Food and Drug Administration against anti-abortion doctors and other groups who sued the FDA after it made the abortion pill mifepristone easier to access. But in oral arguments today, justices appeared skeptical that the plaintiff, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, even has standing to bring this case.
Just to confirm on the standing issue, under federal law, no doctors can be forced against their consciences to perform or assist in an abortion, correct?
It makes perfect sense for the individual doctors to seek an exemption, but as I understand it, they already have that. And so what they're asking for here is that in order to prevent them from possibly ever having to do these kinds of procedures, everyone else should be prevented from getting access to this medication. So why isn't that plainly overbroad scope of the remedy the end of this case?
And joining us now with more are Colleen Connell, Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois, and Peter Breen, Executive Vice President and Head of Litigation at the Thomas More Society. Welcome back to both of you. So, Colleen, we just heard Justices Kavanaugh and Jackson there expressing some skepticism here about the standing of the plaintiff. What was your takeaway from what you heard?
So I think that the justices are skeptical, as your lead-in reported. The plaintiffs in this case, some doctors who are opposed to abortion, have suffered no real injury, which is the baseline for getting into federal court. And because they don't perform abortions, and as you heard in the dialogue, there's an exemption under federal law for physicians being forced to, provide procedures or medical care that is a violation of their conscience. And so I think it's very hard to overcome that bar of no injury in fact.
Peter Breen, did this group, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, do enough to prove their standing, or that somehow they are suffering injury as a result of the FDA's ruling?
Sure, and so the situation here is you've got a pro-life obstetrician who might be working on that wing of the hospital. Maybe they're the only one there. They get called into an emergency situation. So there's not really time to deal with the variances of federal law and what have you. So they're getting called in right away to deal with this patient who has some problem, may not even realize that it's part of a botched abortion or a failed abortion. And so that is part of the harm there, along with their organization, which does studies on these sorts of things. So they suffered what they called organizational damage. So there are cases where that's been applied. So the issue is still very much up in the air.
As I believe Justice Brown pointed out, there in the affidavits that one of the doctors submitted, acknowledged that he had performed actually a D&C without objection. Not clear whether it was a spontaneous abortion, which is a miscarriage, or whether there was even a fetal heartbeat. And so again, even by the plaintiff's own papers, there's a real lack of injury in fact.
Peter Green, say that the plaintiffs get past the issue of standing. What does the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine say the FDA has done wrong here?
Well, there were two big changes. So it's about how the medication is applied. So 2016, FDA took away the requirement to take the misoprostol, the second part of the pill, at a doctor's office. Also reduced almost entirely the reporting of complications. Well, in those years following, from 2016 on, emergency room visits rapidly increased, almost tripled, depending on the studies you look at, 5% or so. And then in 2021, they actually turned the whole thing to an at-home procedure. So you don't even get to see a doctor before you get this abortion pill. The doctor would normally, during that visit, figure out, do you have a viable pregnancy? Do you have an ectopic issue or one of those sorts of things? And then how far along are you? Because folks never quite know for sure. And so are we doing this at the appropriate timing, in that first period of time that's allowed under law? So all of that was wiped away. And so that's really the complaint of the Alliance. And the majority of justices today, even if we have these standing issues, no one, you didn't have the majority of justices saying, oh, the FDA did everything right here. This is a very political process, and so they do have a good claim there if they can get over the standing.
So I disagree about the viability of their claim. And I think what has to be put in context here, Paris, is the fact that this lawsuit is part of a very broad nationwide effort, not only to restrict abortion, but to restrict contraception. And as we saw in the Alabama decision a month or so ago, IVF. It is a very different view of the issue, the practice of medicine, that I think is shared by the American public.
Say the plaintiffs are successful here, what does that mean for the access to this drug?
What that means is that women in states like Illinois who have actually lived in a state that has affirmatively passed protections for access to reproductive health care will not be able to as easily access mifepristone or other contraceptives or other medication abortions. And so that is a very significant impingement on the rights of all women. More than half of all abortions that are performed in this country today are by virtue of medication. And the access to medication abortion, including the new rules in 2021 that Peter described, were a dramatic increase in access because they made healthcare available through the kind of telehealth portals that had become so necessary during the pandemic. And the women are not blocked from actually an in-person visit by virtue of these new regulations. They can, of course, seek an in-person visit if they are showing symptoms that they might have an ectopic pregnancy. But this is where I think it's really important to call out what is really happening in this country. Many millions of women live in states where they cannot easily seek that medical advice because of abortion bans or restrictions that have been put in place by more than 21 states in this post-Dobbs world.
Is that, Peter Breen, is that the ultimate goal here, the plaintiffs, is to eliminate access to this drug?
Well, right now, I mean, what's in front of the court? So we filed an amicus brief on behalf of Heartbeat International. They help folks who are pregnant. They run pregnancy center networks across the world, actually thousands of pregnancy centers together. And their concern is expressed to the court, which is very specific to these issues, was that by removing these protections, by not even requiring an in-person doctor visit and an ultrasound to confirm the pregnancy and make sure you don't have an ectopic situation, you are diminishing women's health, you are increasing emergency room visits. The FDA admitted they were increasing emergency room visits with by rolling back these good regulations. So if they were to win this lawsuit, what would happen in Illinois? Our emergency room visit rate for chemical abortions would go down. Life would get safer and better. And you know what? Look, I disagree with my good friend Colleen here. That is really the issue in front of the court, not the broader issues of abortion, but are we going to protect those who have chosen to get an abortion, give them the best chance at a safe procedure instead of what we've got today?
This is like we would say in my home state of North Dakota, the pot calling the kettle black. It's these restrictions in other states that have made it more difficult for women to access medical care. It's very important to talk about the safety of medication abortions, including mifepristone. The FDA studies show that they are extremely safe. They are safer than prescriptions of Viagra. They are safer than prescriptions of penicillin. The mortality rate per 1,000 people for a mifepristone and misoprostol abortion is 0.06%. For Viagra per 1,000, it is, I believe, 20. And for penicillin, it's 49. And so it is a very safe procedure. Nobody's blocking access to medical care.
What about the issue of regulatory agencies like the FDA? Say the plaintiffs win this case. Does that set kind of a dangerous precedent that these regulatory agencies don't get to set these regulations as they see fit?
And certainly the FDA, we have normally been able to trust the FDA not to be political. If anything, they've almost been too slow. You know, we often complain about that. In this particular area, because it's the issue of abortion, they have not regulated in the way that they normally do with any other drug. So the Administrative Procedures Act applies to them just like it applies to any other regulatory agency. And so we would just say, hey, look, go in, do something that's reasonable, justify your decision. Why would you take your emergency room rate up to almost 1 in 20?
We'll have to.
Instead of where we are.
This will continue, I know, until we hear the final outcome here. We have to leave it there. My thanks to Colleen, Connell, and Peter Breen. Thanks so much. Good to see both of you.
Thank you, Paris.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team on the razor-thin margin in the Cook County State's Attorney's race. So please stay with us. Ballots are still being tallied in the Cook County State's Attorney's race. The aftermath of Mayor Brandon Johnson's rejected Bring Chicago Home proposal. And it's kickoff time for Chicago's elected school board. And here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team of Amanda Vinicki and Heather Sharon, my very, very good friends.
Like how excited you got there, Perry.
Yes, I'm very excited when I get to see both of you. All right, so it's been 1 week now since the primary election, and the ballots are still being tallied, too close to call. Burke jumped out to an early lead, Heather, as we know. That has diminished. Where are we right now?
So the difference right now is 1,600 votes after the Cook County clerk counted about 800 mail-in ballots today. Now, so far, as of this taping, we have not heard anything from the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. So we anticipate some results from them today. When we'll get them, what they will say, who knows?
Why is it taking so long?
So this is the new normal for elections. You have just about half of people voting in person on election day, and you have half of people voting by mail. It takes longer to count mail-in ballots. You have to verify signatures. You have to make sure that they're postmarked by the right thing. Now, in previous elections, this has happened too since 2020, since the pandemic really changed the way people vote. It didn't matter because the leads were large enough that it did not come down to these tiny, tiny margins of just really sort of decimal points at this point. That's why the system is under such significant stress, and that's why we have to wait at least until April 2nd, which is when is the last day for ballots to arrive and when election officials will certify the results.
So, yeah, Paris, I think that it's important to really hone in on that just for a bit, to know that this is standard policy, that Illinois has given 2 weeks from election day for that mail to filter through the USPS and to arrive, as long as it is postmarked. It's got to be postmarked. That is the rule. Not every state does that. Illinois is fairly liberal with that 2-week deadline and giving that full time for the mail to work its way through the system. Nonetheless, that is what it is. So trust in that. It's nothing new.
And, you know, there was some snafus by the Chicago Board of Elections here in counting, although neither campaign is alleging any kind of funny business.
Right. So what happened is that there were 9,000 more ballots set to be counted in sort of the proper place than spokespeople for the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners told reporters.
They weren't found.
They were not found. Right. But because we sort of live in this era of sort of people being on hyper alert for election rigging or election shenanigans, it really alarmed a lot of people. But as you said, both campaigns says, look, we've been there 24/7 watching these ballots. There's nothing to worry about. It was just a mistake.
And this again is incumbent, I think, on we as journalists to really be accurate and precise about what that is. The Board of Elections came forward and said, our bad, our communications error, not a counting error. That is very significant to point out.
All right, the Bring Chicago Home referendum failed by nearly 20,000 votes. The leaders of the supporters of this referendum said that it was distrust in government that helped doom chances. What do they mean by that?
Well, there are a lot of questions about what the city would do with this roughly $100 million that the measure would have allowed them to generate. Would it really go toward homelessness? Would it really, or would they use it for other projects, or would it pay down pension debt, or what would it use? So there were a lot of questions about that. But I think that this is also sort of the era that we're living in, where there's a lot of distrust about government, and people want assurances and lock boxes to bring back an old term to say, if we say we're going to do this, we got to do it, and there have to be sort of legal protections in. That is something that supporters of sort of a dedicated fund to help the unhoused in Chicago is going to have to grapple with going forward.
All right, city officials are set to move migrants out of 5 Chicago Park District sites. Where are they going to be moving them to, and how many migrants will this affect?
I believe there's something about 800 migrants that are in these variety of, say, field houses and such. And this is something that is, I think, important to folks who had relied on those park districts for programming that they want to return come summer and have been frustrated that their, local gym was instead being used as housing. I do think, however, this, of course, does not necessarily resolve the issue. The Johnson administration says we have spots for these folks because they're no longer at the peak of migrants that have come in since really this whole thing began. What is left unanswered, however, is what if that peak returns? Particularly, we have said it before, we will say it again, attention really on Chicago because of that Democratic National Convention, and you can be sure that Republicans will want to make an example of Chicago. What happens then, particularly as the Johnson administration is scaling back shelters, not just at these Park District sites, but others as well?
Heather Sharon, there's an alderman in a bit of hot water here because of and he's been in hot water for some of his protest activities, protesting the Gaza situation right in front of a desecrated, burned American flag. What are his colleagues asking for now?
So this is Byron Sigcho-Lopez, who's been very critical of the Biden administration's handling of the Israel-Gaza war. He spoke after a veteran who burned an American flag in protest of the administration's response. Alderman Sigcho-Lopez says he didn't burn the flag. He didn't realize the flag had been burned at this protest. He spoke after that happened. That has not stopped several of his more conservative colleagues from really sort of laying into him. They say that this is an inappropriate thing for an elected Chicago official to be a part of. There's a press conference tomorrow and talk of calling a special city council meeting to attempt to censure Alderman Sigcho-Lopez. Perhaps we'll see that come up in the city council meeting in a couple of weeks.
Although it seems like there wouldn't be enough votes to do that, but it's pretty clear in these pictures that that flag is right in front of him. It's hard to believe he didn't notice that. Amanda, we just had an election, and now folks are circulating petitions for the next one. This is for the elected school board.
Yeah, you got to turn your eye to November, and what is significant here, of course, is that this is the first time that Chicago is going to be electing, albeit part, not the whole, CPS school Board of Education. And folks that want to run have to get those petitions circulating now, and that is a very much shortened time frame. Typically, if you want to run for office, you know well in advance how many signatures you're going to have, what the districts look like. Because that law was just signed earlier this month by the governor, anybody who wants to run really has to get their act together, and soon, because it is a lot of signatures, a minimum of 1,000, a maximum of 3,000 in order to run. This, by the way, is for a school board seat. So that is where critics say that is too high of a threshold, especially in that is going to be something they believe benefits really an organization that has backers like the CTU. Others say it's a big,
certainly
important
they can
job.
get those signatures, but that's going to be tough for a position like this to get that many signatures. We'll see what happens in these races. All right, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, thank you so much. And up next, another way of conducting elections, we explain. But first, a look at the weather. Illinois just got through with its primary election, but what if there was a different way to vote for candidates? What if you could rank choices in order of your preference? Well, there is a system like that, and it's in use across the country from Maine to Alaska. It's called ranked choice voting. It has its backers as well as detractors, but how does it work? WTTW News explains.
People are obsessed with rankings. Best drummers of all time, the NCAA Top 25, most eligible bachelors. You name it, we rank it. Now, a growing number of jurisdictions are applying the art of ranking to voting. So how does ranked choice voting work? Well, instead of voting for just one candidate, a voter ranks them starting with their favorite. If nobody gets more than 50% of the first place votes, the election goes to an instant runoff, eliminating the bottom candidate and redistributing their votes to the next preference. Let's say the race is between the classic Chicago hot dog, deep dish pizza, Italian beef, and the Greek gyro. Out of 100 total first place votes, hot dog finishes with 40. Pizza gets 30, Italian beef 20, and gyro 10. In a conventional election, case closed, hot dog wins. But not so fast. With ranked choice voting, since no candidate won 50%, it's on to round 2. The gyro is eliminated, and anyone who ranked gyro first now has their second choice counted instead. So, who did the gyro lovers vote as their number 2? Well, let's say hot dog spent a lot of the campaign attacking gyro. Certainly that didn't go unnoticed, and thus none of gyro's fans ranked hot dog second. 5 go to pizza, and 5 go to beef. Now it's hot dog 40, pizza 35, and beef 25. Still, no one's cracked 50%. Beef is last, so beef is out and its votes get redistributed. Hot dog picks up 5 votes, but pizza gets the other 20 and wins 55 to 45. Looks like pizza made the right call, avoiding negative campaigning. Advocates argue ranked choice voting is more democratic and it forces candidates to build coalitions. Detractors cite voter confusion and lower voter turnout, among other claims against it. And that's the dish on ranked choice voting.
And Illinois is expected to release a report analyzing the state's current election process and providing recommendations on how to possibly adopt ranked choice voting in presidential primaries. Starting in 2028, you can visit our website for more of our Emmy Award-winning series, WTTW News Explains. That's at WTTW.com/explains. A personal note before we go tonight. Nearly 20 years ago, I walked into WTTW as a college intern, and I instantly fell in love with Chicago Tonight, a program unlike any other on television. My run here almost feels like a dream, to go from intern to producer to reporter to anchor, all in my hometown for a station that has been part of my life since the day I was born. But as George Harrison says, all things must pass. And I will be stepping down from my role at WTTW on April 12th to pursue an exciting new adventure. I want to express my deepest gratitude to everyone at WTTW for always supporting and nurturing my career. Too many names to mention. Wherever I roam, WTTW will always be home. And of course, I want to thank you, the viewer, for watching me grow up on the air and always letting me into your home and coming up to me on the street and telling me that you watch the show. It means so much to me. I enjoy meeting every single one of you. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to be connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. A push to expand protections for longtime homeowners in South Shore amid gentrification concerns sparked by the Obama Presidential Center. And a new state committee looks to increase access to treatment for sickle cell disease, what it could mean for black patients. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 18 attorneys selected for the 2024 Super Lawyers List.